So we're going to look at doing the texturing for our hero piece in this video. It's quite a long video, so I appreciate there's a lot to go through. So I'm going to try to move through it quickly as possible. So you should have your low poly version, your hero piece, so mine's 729, and you should have your high poly. There's no limit on your high poly, it can have as many faces as you please. This is the one with all the detail and the nice smoothness to it. So obviously these would be aligned when we go to export, so you need to make sure that they've got a good alignment. Obviously I've done that really quickly and eyeballed it. For your UV in, so in workspace we can go to UV editing if you've only got the one monitor. Otherwise go on UV editor and put the UV editor onto your other screen so you've got more space. If you've just got the one monitor, change your workspace. So I've done my UVs, we've gone through that in a previous video and session. The only problem that we have is that our UVs have different resolution. So some have a smaller grid and some have a larger grid. Essentially, the smaller the grid on the UV map, the more resolution it's got because it's larger. So we need to make sure that everything is the same size grid. Actual alignment of the squares in between different texture maps doesn't matter because there's a seam there anyway. So all we need to do is select one of our UV maps and we need to go to the transform tab and texel density, and we need to get, it's going to get the texel density of this piece. And all we need to do is grab us other UV maps and set it. And this is going to make sure that they've all got the same level of density, which means that the actual textures will be the same size. So there won't be any that have more resolution on this map. So we now need to lay them out into our one texture square. So what we can do, first and foremost, make sure his map size is set to 2K, which is 2048. We're happy with his UV maps. They've unfolded well. The grid's not majorly warped. What we're going to do is go to Layout, right at the bottom underneath Arrange and Layout, and we're going to hold Shift and left-click Layout. And it's going to give us some options before we do the actual layout. What we need to make sure is that packing resolution is 2048 and that our texture map size is 2048 as well. So we really make sure we're consistent with the 2K. I like to put 10 shell padding and tile padding. All this is going to do is make sure there's a gap in between our maps so there's no overlap. Once we've done all that, we can apply and it will arrange them in our texture map and maintain the same resolution size between each map. So it's aligned them, and because we've done the shell padding, it's made sure that there's a gap in between them so they're not touching. Now you may want to adjust these. Obviously, it's going to make your life easier if stuff are as vertical as possible. When we're doing multiple objects for a game engine, obviously we'd try to fill this space as much as possible. But just for this brief, we're only doing the one thing. So you can make sure there's plenty of gap in between things to make it easier for you when you come to texture. One thing for me, obviously, I've segmented based off different materials, so the blade will be a different material, so that's on its own thing. The guard would be a different material, so that's in its own. And then the handle would all be one texture, but there's too much stretching on the pommel, so I've had to separate that. So I want to line these up across this edge in my UV map, so it's going to make it easier to apply that texture. So I can select one part on the model, on the seam, and then see on here where they align. So I can see that it's this part of the edge on the main part of the handle, and then on the pommel, obviously this edge is around here. So what I can do now is grab these faces. Obviously I need to rotate them a little bit and then move them back up. So then they sort of align. It's just going to make my life a little bit easier. So again, they're pretty close. So back onto face, just a slight adjustment, and I'm going to move that right up. So look at edge. You're just going to get less of a seam if you can get it aligned as much as possible. Obviously it's a different shape, so it's never going to be perfect. So now I'm happy with this. All I want to do also is make sure that each different texture map is assigned a different material. This is just going to help with his workflow and help to segment different parts. Not super necessary because we're going to do his texture map very specific to his UVs in Photoshop. But If you wanted to just do an override in roughness, for example, it's easier if it's got different materials. So all we need to do is grab the sections that will have a different sort of texture. So this will all be wood. And then you would assign, so hold right click, assign new material and give it a Lambert. I've got them already existing. So that one's going to be Lambert 3. The whole of the blade is going to be Lambert 2. And then I'm going to left click, hold shift and double left click just below to grab the edge loops around to make sure I get all of the guard. And then that's going to have the Lambert 1. So they've all got a different Lambert material. So now UVs are done, low poly is ready to go, and I'm just going to make sure that I file export that. So you'd export your low poly, you would then grab your high poly, and you would make sure, obviously, like we said earlier, aligned on top of each other, and then export your high poly. That's where you then go on to doing your normal baking in X-Normal, which we've done with the Sci-Fi floor, and you can follow the Sci-Fi floor video to do the baking, because it's the exact same settings and process. So now we need to move on to Photoshop. So for myself, I'll get Photoshop opening up. So we can keep Maya open. You don't have to, but it might be easier. And once Photoshop loads, so just give it a second, we need to create an artboard that's appropriate for what we want. So Photoshop will open up. We're going to create a new file, and obviously I've got it ready. We need to make sure that it's the same resolution size as the ones that we're going to bake. So obviously we're doing 2K, so that's 2048. So you can change the pixels, you can enter 2048, you can keep the resolution at 72, and then create. So that's going to give you a square texture map to be able to use. Now what we need to do is to see where his UVs are laid out on this texture map. So we're not going to actually import them. We're just going to get a really quick screenshot actually, and that's just going to use as a guide for us. So Windows Shift S, and then we can just very quickly, it doesn't have to be perfect, get a screenshot of this square of a texture map. We can then go back to Photoshop and just Control V to paste it in, move it into the corner, and then press Control T to be able to adjust it. And this is just going to be a guide for us, just so then we know whereabouts as UVs are based off this square. We're going to click it, we're going to reduce the opacity so that it's not completely blocking his view. So again, doesn't matter, and then we're going to lock it. We don't want to change this now, we don't want to adjust it, we don't want to move it, we don't want it to get in the way. Can delete the background one, but we might keep it on for now. So this is now where you'd gather different materials that you want to place on. So you'd obviously look at gold metal, you might look at scratch metal, you might look at wood. You need to download all the textures that you're wanting to apply to your model and have them ready to go. So I've already got them downloaded, so they're just here. So this one's my wood, so I'm going to pull that in, and then adjust it to where I want it. So if you click around the corner, you'll see that it changes to like a little curved arrow. That's for your rotation. It comes with a transform on. If it doesn't have it, remember it's Control T to get this transform option. Now, no matter which vert that you use to scale, it keeps it uniform. If you want to adjust just the vert that you're selecting, you need to hold Control, and then it will do the stretch and not do a uniform scale. So, based off that, I want it to be about this size. I also need to make sure it's across there, and I need to get the pommel in there. So instead of scaling the whole thing, I'm going to hold Control and just scale downwards, so vertically. So that's covering the whole of the handle. I'm going to press Enter just to confirm that. We can still go back and change it. Remember, Control T to adjust the settings. So I'll place that back. I've now got a very quick scratched metal look that I want to apply to the actual blade. So I'm going to get it to the rotation I want, make sure that it's aligned, and I just want to adjust it vertically, so holding Control and then left click. So that's my scratch texture across the model. Now the scratches are actually going the wrong way, so if I want it to be really perfect, I might adjust the bounds of this and really stretch it, just so then the scratches are actually going the right way. So this is fine, but obviously it's now overlapping onto my guard. And I don't want the guard to have this scratched metal look. I want it to have this gold look. So, sorry, I need to confirm that. So press enter or the tick. And then I'm going to drag in the gold. So what might happen is that I've got my gold, but obviously the scratched metal's above it. To get around this, we need to make sure we utilize our layers. So I want the gold to be on top, so the gold needs to be on top in the layers. Obviously this one doesn't matter because it's just a UV guide. So the gold is now on top of the scratched metal, so now it will be on the actual texture. So make sure that you've got them layered properly over here to make sure you've not got the wrong thing overlapping. So again, Control T for transform. I'm going to adjust it round, I'm going to scale it up uniformly, and I'm just going to have it over the whole thing like that. And then confirm. So now we've got us colour and as roughness on there. We need to obviously hide the UV because we don't want to export the actual UVs. They were just a guide, so we need to hide them over here on the layer. And then now we can do File and just export as a PNG. So quick export as PNG. You call that whatever, so mine will just be Katana albedo and save that. So that's going to be as colour information. Now just to quickly look at getting it into Blender. So again, we'll obviously open up Blender. So let me just find it. And we're going to pull in our low poly model like we did with the sci-fi floor. So just general, delete the cube. We're going to do File, Import, and OBJ. You're going to find wherever you've put your low poly model and import it. Now it may come in, and this is just because of it's going from Maya to Blender, it may come in looking weird. So if we go into shading, you'll see that it's putting mine like a weird transparency. So all we need to do is select as object. We then need to go to the materials down here, and there's just one thing we need to untick, which is show backface, and that will get rid of the transparency. Because I've separated it into different materials, they now have 3 slots for each one. So we need to do that for every slot. Turn off the show backface, and then for the final one. So now it's not transparent anymore. So remember, slots are as different materials, so that it's going to make it easy for us to manage and manipulate certain aspects of this model. So I'm going to find my exported quick export PNG of my albedo, wherever I save that. There it is in downloads. Left click, drag and drop it in. So we've got a weird red on there. All we need to do is plug the colour into base colour, and it should apply it. Now mine's not exported right, so just be careful with something like that. Sometimes it's with the quick export, you may need to just do a normal one and change the settings. I'll go on to the other material that we had. Same map straight in because we've organised it, supplied it there, and then we do it for its final actual object. So again, same map, plug it in, and then it's applied it there. So you will have a seam because that's the cut of his UVs. You'll see that I have a seam underneath because I've tried to place it alongside here because it's going to be less seen by the player. They're mainly going to see it over here. Now in the next video I'm going to show you how we use this albedo map that we just made in Photoshop to create a roughness map. You can do an overriding roughness. So because we've separated it, we could say that, for example, that this material, which is as guard, is metal, and that we want it quite rough. If we'd not separated it out, it would apply this metallic roughness to everything at once. So that's why we did the little management. So again, the blade's metallic and the roughness is quite high, so we put that down on the slider. But on the next video I will show you how we can get very specific roughness. So we may want these grooves to be obviously rougher than the parts that aren't scratched, and so on and so forth. So a very quick run through of getting us UVs out, getting some textures on quickly, and then getting it into Blender. So thanks for watching. Bye.